I had come just 6 months prior to the big break. The demonstrations broke out. It had been here maybe 6 months. And my respect for Dr. King was of such that I would have done anything, any assignment he would have given me, I would have done it without question. But it just so happened that his assignment was to lead a march, to go to jail. Now, yeah, I think I don't want to get mixed up there. Now, the question was concerning the period
when he initially called you.
Oh, to come
about
about
suburban, right?
yes. Well, his brother A.D. was very active in our communication, so oftentimes the communication was not directly with him. It was sometimes through his brother, who was right there with him every day and night. And he indicated through his brother that he wanted me, Nelson Smith, and himself, that's Martin King's brother, to lead the march, I believe, on Palm Sunday.
Right.
And we agreed. Nelson Smith was not a great jail goer, but because A.D., who was always a provocative person, had suggested we would go together and we would call ourselves the Three Horses of the Apocalypse. Now, what that meant was nothing. We didn't know what it meant. It was just some high-sounding words. Three Horses of the Apocalypse. And we were together after church at St. Paul, I believe, the St. Paul Church. And then after we would pray in a little sermon of prayer, then we would go out and march. And our church has always gotten out before other churches. So I was there a long time waiting for my colleagues to show up. I was getting a bit nervous that A.D. and Nelson wouldn't show up, you know what I'm saying? I would be out there by myself. So finally they did show up. And they began to sing the songs and pray, and people praying, some people were shouting, and I believe I heard my mother's, out there crying. And but it was, you can't even convey the spirituality of those moments. They were very emotional moments. Because all you can do is make you see the person, we don't have some, we have lost of like anything. But anyway, out of a large crowd of maybe 1,200 people, we were able to get about 40 people to volunteer to go. And we all went out on the sidewalk and lined up, because all the marchers were on the sidewalk. You would think of them maybe in the middle of the street blocking traffic. No, every march that was ever taken was done from the sidewalk. But once we got lined up on the sidewalk to walk, I looked through the crowd, and there was my daddy. I said, oh, Lord. Then my daddy started toward me. I said, not now, Daddy, not now. Because he told me over and over again, you leave this thing alone, and he was afraid I would get hurt, you see. So he told me, leave it alone, leave this thing alone, segregation, you see. So there at the moment, my big moment of marching, here my daddy go, you see. He got close as he could to me, reached through the crowd and shook hands with me. I could have walked all the way to my government by that time.
That's all you needed.
All I needed, he shook hands with me and we went back. So before long, we were in jail. It was an agreed upon thing. In other words, they knew what route you would take. And they were all times designated when they would pick you up. And they were smart. I remember one of the later marches that out of 1,000 people, you could only get 40 to volunteer to march. Out of the people left in the church, 1,000, you have 900 people more left in the church. But once we came out and get lined up to march and marched off, then all 90 would come and follow us. In other words, they consider themselves not involved, but just friends. So
So you then, when the three of you were
Yes.
approached,
Okay, we got to the police, and as we approached the police, the guy had a bullhorn, and he says, this march could go no further. You either disband or you're under arrest. He gave us a choice to walk away or be arrested. At that point, I remember AD saying, pray Poland. Well, we dropped to our knees, you know. After he said you're under arrest, more or less, we didn't kneel then. That's when AD said to me, pray Poland. And I started praying on camera. But once the prayer's over, then we stood up, and the police would escort us to the paddy wagon.
was it AD or was it Reverend Smith that said pray for it?
AD.
AD.
AD was always the instigator. He had everybody doing whatever he thought they ought to be doing. So they paraded us. They would never let you walk by yourself. They would always catch you by the arm and pull you. But there was no prostrating on the floor and having the police drag you. King would not allow that. King had us to understand you're breaking the law. And when the man said you're under arrest, you must go peacefully and quietly to the paddy wagon. So,
Did they, in the paddy wagon that you were placed in, were there other people other than the three of you?
there may have been one or two others. It was very small and tight back there. And so you couldn't fit in, but so many is back in the paddy wagon. But I remember on our way to jail, we were being thrown from one side of the paddy wagon to another. If the guy was very upset, who was driving, we were singing, "We shall overcome." And he was, more we would sing, the more upset he would come. The more we saw he was upset, the more we would sing. See? By the time he got to the city hall, to the jailhouse, he would go around and open the door. I remember he opened the door, and there was this big chorus, "We shall overcome." And he pulled his billy club and said to y'all, "You better cut out that singing or else." Well, in order to come out of the paddy wagon, you had to kind of dip your head and come out. Nelson Smith thought about that thing a while, because in the back, AD was saying, "Sing, sing." But the driver was saying, "Stop singing." And AD was saying, "Sing." So Nelson Smith, knowing his head would come out the paddy wagon first, he told AD, "You better stop that GD singing." Because my head would go out first. AD always in the background about "Sing, sing," you know. So he was the instigator. He made things happen.
How long were you in jail?
We were in jail maybe. I was in jail longer than AD, because AD and Nelson started right away to get their deacons to come and get them out. And all about freedom was in that we led the folk into the jail. We ought to stay in jail with them. But AD insisted the fact he could be, AD and Nelson Smith said they could be more effective outside. So it wasn't long before deacons were there to take them out. They'd been there about 6 hours, 7 hours. And I was the only one left, and was able to stay with the people. And at some point, I did get out.
Did you stay overnight?
Yes. Yes.
During this particular time, the movement, of course, was at its height. But there was seemingly was some difficulties after about a month of marching that it lost some of its steam.
Yes.
And then there seemingly was the need to discuss how to reinvigorate the movement.
Well, it's hard to keep excitement going. And the people who had gone to jail had been once and some twice. And you needed more people to go to jail. There was something I remember very vividly, the guy saying to me, "Reverend, I can't march today. I got to work today." So And thank God for that. At least he was ready to go to his job on the day assigned, and even though they had these huge, he had to go. So this guy said he couldn't go because he had to work. So you really had people. Oh yes, I'm about to hit the point that they were running out of people to go back again. So they went out to Miles College to get college kids. But I gather that since Miles may have been having a corporate fund drive, which sending students out would thoroughly, jeopardize their well-being. So they couldn't get any miles to, so I think that on their way back, not have with their hands empty with miles students, somebody came up with a bright idea. Let's go back to high school. Because I admit that was not any long-range planning of, that we know a month from now we're going to do. We did so many things that, I know that was the miracle of the movement is that there was no grand plan. It just happened. The time was right and it happened. But but ask me another question.
So the children then were brought into the...
Yes, children were brought in. Yes.
And this sort of reinvigorates.
Oh, that really set it off. But I remember vaguely, just prior to that, and that was a real eye-opener for me, a growth time for me. King came in and says, the press is meeting. Let's get something going. Well, that was the first time that I realized that God was not leading the movement. I thought up until this point we depending on God. But I found out it was the newspapers too. We needed God and the newspaper. He told us to get something going. The press was leaving, so that was. I grew up though to understand you do need that.
Yes, some have said that Bull Connor played a very prominent role, and the movement owes him as much credit as any other single individual for the success of the movement because of his tactics. How do you feel about it?
I don't like that. I don't like the old Bull Connor. No, I don't think you owe it. I think that the time was right. I don't think anybody made it happen. I think if the climate in the South was of such that the South was totally opposed to it, it would have never happened. The time was right. You needed a Martin King, you needed a Fred Shuttlesworth, you needed a Bull Connor. And they constituted the time. The time was right.